Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unviritam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Putari Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaisnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Saganagunatam Pitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Visakan Vitamsha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinambando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Risavanu Sute Devi Namami Hari Priye Vancha Karpata Rubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So,
Mataji, I can start reading the verse and we can read the translation and purport until Mataji comes. Is that okay?
okay, fine. Mataji.
Okay. Hare Krishna, everyone. Please kindly accept my humble obeisances, O Guru Shri Prabhupada. So we're going to read today Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, text 22, I think. Okay. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswati vyasam tato jayamudiraye nashtaprayasha bhadreshu nityam bhagavate sevaya bhagavate tam slokir bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Hare Krishna. Short prayer. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 22. Buddhamanasya Rishibhir. You want to repeat?
We repeat? Yes. Bodhyamanasya Rishibhi
Atmanastaj Grihikshataha.
Atmanastajigik Shata
Karnona Nirabhidyatam.
Karnaucha Niravyedyetam
Dishaha Sotram Gunagraha.
Disha Shrotram Gunagraha.
Thank you. So, Buddha Manasya, desiring to understand.
Bodhyamanasya, desiring to understand.
Oh, Mataji is here. So I continue or?
Yes, Mataji. Sorry, Hare Krishna. My laptop's giving me a bit of trouble. So while I sort it out.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. Okay. Rishibhi, by the authorities.
Rishibhi, by the authority.
Atmanaha, of the Supreme Being.
Atmanaha, of the Supreme Being.
Tat, that.
That.
Jigrik Sataha, when he desires to take up.
Jigrit Sataya, when he desires
to take up.
Karno, the ears.
Karnau,
the ears.
Also.
Also.
Nirabhadyatam,
become manifested.
Dishaha, the direction or the god of air.
Dishaha, the direction or the god of
air.
Shrotram, the power of hearing.
Shrotram, the power of
hearing.
Gunagraha, and the objects of hearing.
Gunagraha and the objects of hearing.
You want to take over now, Mataji? Are you okay?
Yes, Panchali Mataji, please take over. Please.
Mataji, is it possible to, I'm still on my mobile, just literally one more minute, I'm going to try.
Okay.
If it's
We can
possible to read the
translation. Okay. Ajazra translation. Translation: by development of the desire of the great sages to know the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desired to hear about the self. The purport, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, by advancement of knowledge, one should try to know about the Supreme Lord, the Summum Bonum of everything. Knowledge doesn't mean knowledge only of the laws of nature or physical knowledge, which are working by the direction of the Lord. The scientists are eager to hear about the physical laws working in material nature. They are eager to hear through the medium of radio and television about things taking place far away from them on other planets. But they should know that the power of hearing and the instruments for hearing were given to them by the Lord for hearing about the self or about the Lord. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in hearing the vibrations of mundane affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Lord through Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of oral reception of knowledge. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Mataji, I think I've got it, but it's just giving me a really weird name, so I don't know if you're able. Can you hear me properly?
Yes,
Yes,
we can hear
Mataji,
you.
Okay,
Yes.
Mataji.
Yes.
So, yeah, so I'm not sure what's happening because I can't come on the video. I'm going to keep trying, but because it's getting late, I think I'll start with the session and then just keep trying in between. So I'm just going to give it a last.
Mataji, Hare Krishna, just to let you know, I will leave in like 20-25 minutes. Sorry, I'm not rude, but I have something to do. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay,
Thank you
Mataji.
very much. Priya Govind Prabhu is taking the is hosting the class.
Okay.
So Hare Krishna Mataji.
Okay, Hare Krishna Mataji. So we are doing, okay, can you see? Yeah, I think I've got it.
We can
So,
see you.
oh, brilliant. Okay, brilliant. So we are doing Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 10 and verse 22. So thank you very much for reading the purport and the text. So let's just start. Om Jnana Timirandhyasya Jnana Jana Shalakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tashme Sri Guruve Namaha. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So I pay my obeisances to my Guru. Without his mercy, I wouldn't have been able to come and do the service. I also pay my obeisances to the Jagat Gurus and to all of you for giving me, for your mercies. So we are continuing on Ashra Tattva. So as we were talking about, how the 10th tattva or the Ashra tattva is the most important. And we spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. And then last week, we reiterated the fact when we talked about the three Purushas, the Adi-Daivik, the Adipotic, and the Adhyatmic. As discussed last week as well, for the rest of the chapter, because the Ashra Tattva is the most important Tattva, it is further and further explained in various ways. So very quickly, a quick recap on what we talked about last week about how the Virat Purusha is a manifestation of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, and how he is in charge of everything, all our senses, our body, everything. And we talked about the prana, the life air inside us, I mean, how that acts and how that is used to give the life energy. And when that leaves the body, the material body is of no use, and then it goes back to its original state of the five gross elements. And we talked about how the adipautic is the gross, the body. So, for example, if you want to see something, it's the eyes, the eyeballs. That would be the adipautic. The perception to see, the perception of vision, that sense of vision, that is adhyatmic, and the controlling deity who is in charge of every single part of our body, that is Adi Daivik. And we also have been reading in the last few verses how each controlling deity looks after every single part of our body, but at the end of the day, all of that is being controlled by the Lord. Ultimately, the Virat Purusha, who's a part of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, who is an expansion of the Lord, Mahavishnu, and then the Lord. So, so ultimately, we go back to at the end of each verse, we are reminded that no matter where we start, ultimately we really do go back to the Lord, and He is the supreme Ashraya, and we are all His Ashritas. Now, the verse today is again a reminder of the same thing, but it expands. So it touches a bit upon what we read earlier around around hearing, and also a little bit of seeing, and then it stretches or expands it further into what do we really need to see, what do we really need to hear, what do we really need to know about, and what is real knowledge, and what do the acharyas, the great sages, what do they recommend? And to understand that, let us again start with where we start all the time, with us. We tend to think that each one of us, we have this body, and this body is like a machine. So we tend to think that I am this body, I am this machine, and because the body has got senses, think that I am free to use my senses as I want. I can, if I desire some senses, if I wish to see something, if I wish to hear something, if I want to, go and touch something, go somewhere, that is entirely, dependent on me, because I am in charge of everything, because we identify ourselves with the body. And this is a concept we talked about last week as well, so I'm not expanding on that. But say, for example, when we say we want to smell something and we think, oh, I will smell. But what if we have a bad cold? What happens then? Then our power of smelling is temporarily lost. Do we think of that when we first have the desire to smell something? What happens if there is no air and we want to, the air carries the aroma? What happens if there is absolutely zero air and that aroma from maybe a flower, from a perfume or something, that is not carried? Do we think of that when we first have the desire to smell? So it is explained that, when the Supreme Purusha desires to smell the odors, only then does everything manifest simultaneously. So then the Adipautic, the Adidaivik, and the Adhyatmic, when what we talked about, all three have to work together. So last week we gave the example of the sunlight, and unless and until there is the eyeball, the sunlight, and also Surya Dev sanctioning it, and ultimately the Virat Purusha sanctioning it, we won't be able to see anything. So when all the three, Adhyatmic, Adipautic, Adidaivik, they all come together, simultaneously work together, and on top of that, the Lord, the Virat Purusha, sanctions it. That is when we are able to, smell. So the Lord desires the Lord. The ultimate desire is actually the Lord. But the problem is we don't think of that in that way. So the body and its mechanism is given to us by the Supreme Person, the Lord, and it is only by His mercy that we get everything. And we are told about this in the Upanishads and all the other Shastras and many times. And now over here, and because this is something which has been, this is a concept which has been talked about in the last few verses as well. So before we more go into our, more deeper into our verse today, let's pause briefly to hear about why is it that ultimately everything depends on the Lord. And we understand it from the very, it's a popular pastime. You might have heard about it already, about Kumbhakarna and how he came about, sleeping 6 months a year. So the popular retelling says that, Kumbhakarna, he wanted to, along with his brothers, wanted to perform a major yagna to please Lord Brahma. And Lord Indra, always being the Lord who's always worried about losing his position, he became a bit jealous and he went to Lord Brahma to say that, they don't give that boon to Kumbhakarna to become very, very powerful because he's wanting to take my throne. So Mother Saraswati, being she's the wife of Mother Saraswati in the material world. In the material world, she's the wife of Lord Brahma, and Lord Brahma requested Mother Saraswati to do something. So again, very very quickly to say to mention this pastime. So instead of the word Indrasana, when Kumbhakarna was asking for a boon, instead of the word Indrasana, Indra, Asana, Indra, the Lord, Asana, the throne of Indra, he asked for Nidrasana. Nidra meaning sleep, and asana meaning the bed for sleeping. And so instead of asking for the throne of Indra, he asked for a bed of sleeping. And instead of asking for nirdevatvam, annihilation of the devas, nirdevatvam, okay? Instead of that, he asked for nidravatvam, nidra. Instead of nirda, he said nidra. So you see just a play of a sound here and there. And nidra means sleep. So his request was automatically very, very quickly granted by Mother Saraswati. And so instead of the asana of Indra, instead of annihilating the devas, which is actually what Kumbhakarna wanted when he wanted to say nirdevatvam, but he ended up saying nidravatvam, which actually means sleep. And then he realized that, he's got the boon to sleep all the time. However, the Lord, his curse was reduced upon, request, and he was led to sleep only for 6 months, and then the other 6 months he would be away. However, it goes back to say that we may desire something. We may have all the plans. We may perform austerities and sacrifices. But at the end of the day, it depends on the controlling deities. Lord Saraswati, Mother Saraswati, she's the controlling deity of the speech. And then we also see who's controlling all of the Adidevic, Adipautic, Adhyatmic. It is the Lord. So unless and until there is the ultimate sanction of the Lord, we can desire as much as we want, but we won't be able to even move our hand without the sanction of the Lord. And if there is time at the end, we will come back to another pastime which very nicely says the same thing, where Lord Vishnu was directly responsible for, controlling the desire of of a devotee. So we see that this is what is being told to us in verse after verse, that ultimately our Ashra, the person who is sanctioning everything, is the Lord. But last time we also touched upon the other bit. We also touched upon the Paramatma in our heart. Now, all the controlling deities, they are controlled and regulated. And when we say the Lord is the ultimate sanctioner, who do we actually mean as the ultimate sanctioner? It's the expansion of the Lord as the Paramatma who resides in our heart. Now, we have heard about the concept of the Paramatma over, in Bhagavad Gita and many times in Srimad Bhagavatam so far. And we understand that the Paramatma resides in every single living entity. He's the super soul, Shiradaksha Vishnu, and he sanctions. He's the ultimate witness. He witnesses everything that the living entity does, and he's the final one to sanction everything. So the sanction doesn't automatically happen. Everything is controlled and regulated and arranged by the Lord, by the Supreme Lord. Which brings in the concept of dependence and independence. So when we talk about Ashra Tattva, the Ashra and the Ashrita, what we are really talking about, if we talk about in English, it is dependence and non-dependence, or being independent. So we can say that every living entity, whether it's the smallest of ant, and then going up to Lord Brahma in the material world, we are all dependent on the Lord, but the Lord is completely independent. But then we might question that, yes, we are talking about being dependent on the Lord in this material world. What happens in the spiritual world? So the spiritual beings, they love the Lord very much, and the Lord loves them very much. Obviously, the Lord loves everybody in the material world as well. We are all his children. So he loves every single person. But are the souls in the spiritual world, are they dependent as well? Are they does this Ashra Tattva work in the spiritual world as well? And the answer to that is yes, it does. So whether we are in the material world or whether we are in the spiritual world, it is the same. We all are ultimately dependent on the Lord. The only difference being in the spiritual world is that, the bodies, the spiritual bodies, they are not encaged in a material body, as is the case of an individual soul in a material world. So in the spiritual world, there is that freedom, the freedom of not being encaged in a material body, and not having the limitations of a material body. So we understand when we have the material body, we can only have vision. We can't see what is at the back of our head. We can't hear everything. We can't smell everything. Yes, there are living entities. There are animals who can see better than us, but they don't have the human consciousness. So there is, more or less everything and there are limitations in every material body that we have in this material world. In the spiritual world, there isn't that limitation. But what do we mean by being dependent in the spiritual world? What we mean is that the Lord, with his internal energy, which is, and again, with his love and internal energy, Yogamaya, that is how the spiritual entities are controlled. And they are all controlled in such a way because automatically, by default, being a part and parcel of the Lord, and being in their original constitutional position, they already are in this, all serving the Lord in love. But the Lord reciprocates that, and the internal energy of the Lord, which controls them, is not a control to restrict them of anything, but it's a control of love. And that is because at the end of the day, there is that distinction between the dependent, wherever we are. We cannot deny the fact that we are all dependent on the Lord, because we all come from the Lord. We wouldn't even exist had it not been for the Lord. And we have to make the distinction between us, the dependent, whether the spirit soul is in the material world or in the spiritual world, and the independent, who is the Lord, who is the ultimate, sanctioner, the witness, and under whose shelter we all are. And had it not been for him, none of us would have existed. Nothing would have been, created. Nothing would have existed. So there is that clear distinction, whether one is in the material world or whether one is in the spiritual world, that it is only and only the Supreme Personality of God, Krishna, who is absolutely independent. Everybody else is dependent, whether we are in the material world or whether we are in the spiritual world. Of course, the gradations differ, how much we are dependent, and it is much more relaxed, and it's a mood of love all around in the spiritual world, and it is much more restricted in the material world. And so we come to the concept of the impersonalists, where there are souls who may have done severe austerity, and they want to become one with the Lord. So they just want to be liberated. They want to transcend the material world, but they do not accept the devotional service. And so they remain in the Brahman existence, where there is no spiritual form, nor are there any material body or any kind of limitations of Maya. Now we say that this is a temporary state. Why? Because this person, this soul, he's completely liberated, but at the same time, he's not completely liberated, because he's averse to devotional service and does not surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is where we come into the main topic of our verse today, and that is knowledge. Why do we require knowledge? And this is the reason why we do. Because when we see this third, so there are three, we've just talked about the three kinds of different types of existence. One is this existence in the material world, where the material beings, they are full of ignorance or contaminated by Maya, because being in this material world for lifetimes after lifetimes, and are completely controlled by Maya, unless and until they start practicing devotion to be able to transcend or go beyond Maya, or start practicing, devotion. And then we talked about the existence in the spiritual world, where the existence is in association of the Lord, and where we are controlled by his internal energy, but controlled through love. And so there is complete knowledge in the spiritual world, and there is lack of knowledge in the material world. But then we come to this third stage of existence, where where the souls are liberated. However, their knowledge is incomplete. And why is that so? Because they are averse to devotional service. And so here we pause a bit. We are talking about knowledge. We are talking about the three types of existence. So how do we acquire knowledge? We've been talking about Ashra Tattva. We've been talking about the senses so far. So how do we actually acquire knowledge? Because that is the ultimate goal. We want to transcend this material world and go back to Godhead. And that is where we come back to the senses again. So when we say we want to acquire knowledge, we acquire knowledge through our eyes, through our ears, through through our different senses, touch, speaking, hearing, watching, seeing. That is where we have to engage our various senses to be able to acquire the right knowledge. Not knowledge of ignorance, where we start thinking of ourselves to be the doer, the controller, the proprietor, as we've been, as Bhagavad Gita teaches us, where the material senses takes over us, and we identify ourselves completely with our material senses. So we don't want that kind of knowledge. It takes a while to go back to the spiritual world for a material being. It doesn't happen overnight. Although Prabhupada well, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita right at the end, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, surrender unto me and immediately you can come to me. And Prabhupada says that in his lectures many a times, that it takes 1 minute. It takes just a minute to go back to Godhead, as long as you surrender unto God completely. We see how Draupadi, she raised her hands in complete surrender, and only then Krishna saves her. Prior to that, she couldn't. Krishna didn't come prior to that. Because Draupadi was trying to engage her various senses. She was trying to engage her hands, to hold her cloth, her sari, but she couldn't. It was only when she surrendered completely that Krishna came. It was only when Arjuna surrendered completely in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita that Krishna actually starts giving him the knowledge of Gita. So we can go to the spiritual world immediately as long as we surrender completely to the Lord. However, that's not so easy to do. So it is required, so that spiritual existence where there is complete knowledge of the true identity of the self and the true identity of the Lord is the required or the desired state of being, because that's a constitutional position, but that is not very easy for to go back. You might take lifetimes, you might take a minute, or you might take lifetimes. So what the sages are saying, and what our verse today says, is that when we are in this material world, we mustn't try to get to that half-hearted knowledge, what the impersonalists have. They just want to, merge into the Brahman. We mustn't we mustn't want that half-hearted knowledge. If we do want knowledge, we want to have the complete knowledge. And that knowledge, we don't want that intelligence and knowledge which is faulty, because half-hearted knowledge is not purified knowledge, because that wouldn't take us to the actual liberation, which is Jive Swarupai Krishna Nitya Das, to become the Nitya Das of Krishna. That wouldn't give us that liberation. That would only take us to a space where there is nothing. And in one of his purports, Prabhupada mentions that very beautifully by giving the example of a space capsule. And he says that, when there is a space capsule, it leaves the earth. It leaves the earth and it takes some people with them. But the space capsule has to land somewhere. It cannot be hanging in the air forever. So similarly, a person who wants to get out of this material world, they have to take shelter in one of the spiritual planets in Vaikuntha Loka. One cannot be without shelter. It has to land somewhere. But if it fails to take shelter in one of the spiritual planets, it will fall back again in this material world. It will fall back again to this material, this earthly planet. So similarly, people who want to be liberated and want to just merge into Brahma Jyoti, they may remain in that effulgence in Brahma Jyoti for a while. but that is not the eternal existence. And it cannot be, one cannot be in that state for indefinite length of time. Because what does Krishna say to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita? That the soul, again, the constitutional, not just the constitutional position, but the behavior, the natural behavior of the soul is to be active. So when explaining to, this is in chapter 3, I forget the verse number, but Krishna says to Arjuna that that is the original behavior of the soul. The soul is always active. And so if we have a soul just merged into the Brahma Jyoti with nothing to do, it is automatic, automatically after a while, the soul will be distressed. And the soul will fall back into the material world again in want of wanting to do some action. So this is half-hearted knowledge. And we are being told that this is a knowledge which we mustn't aspire towards. So we are given 3 stages of existence: the total ignorance, the half-hearted knowledge, which is imperfect knowledge and which is impure knowledge. And in one of the purports, Prabhupada uses the word impure because it is devoid of devotion. In such a state of knowledge where one just wants to just go beyond the material realm, go beyond the control of Maya, without taking shelter of Krishna, without accepting that Krishna is the ultimate shelter and practicing devotion for it, that is impure knowledge, because it disconnects with the Creator. It is disregarding, disconnecting, and not acknowledging the Creator from whom the soul, individual soul, comes from. And because it is disrespecting the absolute Creator, the absolute shelter, it is, as Prabhupada says, it is impure knowledge. And so the sages recommend, as the verse says, the sages recommend to engage our senses in pure knowledge, in accepting Krishna to be the ultimate shelter. That is knowledge. So we see that apart from our gross body, so we've talked about the senses, we've talked about the 3 Purushas, the Adidaivic, Adipautic, Adhyatmic. We've talked about the different existences and the knowledge we want to acquire. Now, there is one gap which we did not really mention about. Can anyone think of something which we talked about all the other bits? So it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So we, last week we started about where it all started with Mahatattva, and then, the 5 gross elements, the catalyst, the 3 gunas, how they're employed, the prana, and then all of that we talked about coming into Aditaivic, the 3 Purushas, and we came to the Paramatma today. We talked about how he's the ultimate sanctioner and he's the ultimate witness. But in all of this jigsaw puzzle, there is one thing that we have missed. Can anyone think of it? So when we are thinking about when we are engaging our senses, because we are relating everything, we are relating knowledge to using our senses to acquire knowledge.
The Pradhana, Mataji?
Yes, Mataji, the pradhana is right at the beginning. So the pradhana has to be agitated. And then
It is the material nature. Material nature.
The prakriti, the nature, yes, it comes. Yeah, we also talked about Mother Nature last week because that acts as the womb. Yes, thank you, Mataji. No, you're very right. But there's still one thing that we are missing. When we think about when we are engaging our senses.
The jiva, the jiva tattva.
the Jiva Tattva, the soul. Yes, we do need the soul, and we said the soul starts identifying with the gross body, and that's where, you know, all the adhyatmic happens, because the soul starts thinking that I am the senses, and I'm the perception, and it's me.
The super soul, Paramatma.
Super soul, yes, we just talked about the super soul, who's the actual sanctioner. But in all of this, what we really missed is when we are engaging our senses, we are saying, yes, we want to smell something, we want to see something, but what is this something? What is this something? The something is the ultimate object, the object of isn't it the object of perception, or the you know, apart from our gross body, we you know, we have, you know, we use our senses and perceptions and the controlling deity and the ultimate sanctioner, but we really, really need the object of the senses. Now, we've actually touched upon it. We say, you know, we use all our senses to gather knowledge. So we say that all of the senses we are using to gather knowledge, and that becomes, you know, that is one of the objects of our senses. Now, that is why, that is what the sages are saying as well, that yes, you engage everything. But now the object of senses can be understood in two ways. In the localized form, the object of senses is what we call the Vishaya, or the object of Vishaya. And we say Indriya Vishaya. Indriya means senses, and Vishaya means the object of senses. For example, we say the ears. Now, for the ears to hear something, to hear the sound, there needs to be sound vibrations. And these vibrations can be perceived through the ear, through the power of hearing. So, you know, we are engaging the ears, the perception, and then it's sanctioned by the controlling deity, sanctioned by the Virat Purusha, sanctioned by the Paramatma, and then we get to hear. But we need those vibrations. We need the object. We need those different types of vibrations which are actually reaching us. Similarly, you know, if you're engaging our eyes, so we hear something, we see something, but at the end of the day, if I say, you know, the ultimate object is I want to see my mobile phone. So there needs to be an object, or the Indriya Vishaya, for which all the senses are engaged. Now, today we are seeing that this object can be the knowledge. It is the knowledge because through our senses, so if we say we use our senses to see, to check our mobile phones, and through the mobile phone is an object, and this gives us knowledge that, you know, this is an object through which we can make phone calls, we can check the internet, etc. So we are gaining knowledge through seeing something. Similarly, we gain knowledge through the sound vibrations. You know, if someone is talking about, you know, speaking about something, any topic, unless and until there is that sound vibration which reaches our ear, which reaches the adibautic, we won't be able to, you know, we won't get that, we won't understand, we won't get that knowledge. So to acquire, so the ultimate thing is, you know, we need to use the senses for the object, for the to get to the ultimate purpose. And we are saying that that ultimate purpose is the knowledge. And what the sages say over here is that acquire that perfect knowledge. So when we go more deeper into this, what is this knowledge? What is this object of knowledge? That is when we are further told over here that, you know, it is mentioned that all the living entities, we all want in this material world, we want to enjoy this material world in a variety. And the living entities, we want to gain knowledge, so we go to school, we find job, we get skills, we acquire qualifications, and all of these we do by using all these arrangements of seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, etc. But what really is the higher purpose? Everybody wants knowledge, which is the ultimate object. But what kind of knowledge is ideal? And so the great sages, as we are told in this verse, the great sages, they want to hear about the self. That is the knowledge they want to hear about. And what is the self? The Atma. What is the Atma? So Atma then can be divided into two. You have the minute Atma, which is our individual souls, and then you have the Paramatma, who's the super soul. So how do we know that? Because we all come into this, world, we come as ignorant. It is only in the 7th month when a child is in the mother's womb. It is only from the 7th month when the soul gets to see the super soul, that they start acquiring, they start understanding things, and then they pray to the Lord to say it and promise that they will be devotees as soon as they come out, and then they pray to the Lord to bring them out from the painful situation they are in the mother's womb. But as soon as we come out of the mother's womb, we are completely captured by Maya and ignorance. So Krishna says to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita that, and I'll only read the translation, that one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, that is the man of steady intelligence, and that is the man who can get true knowledge. So we see we have the senses, we use the senses, we now understand what needs to be, what is the kind of object we get by using the senses. The object is acquiring knowledge. And then we come to the answer, what kind of knowledge is really recommended by the great sages? The knowledge of the soul, the knowledge of Atma, the knowledge of self, and not just the self, but also the knowledge of the Paramatma. But how do we get that? Because we all come out as ignorant people, in the world of Maya, we are ignorant. So then Krishna is telling Arjuna that knowledge can be gained if a man can control his senses, because by controlling one's senses, one gets steady intelligence. And then we see the example of Maharaj Ambarish, who was able to, have perfect control over his senses, even under testing situations. So when Durvasa Muni, out of envy, misused his mystic potency and created a demon to kill Maharaj Ambarish for having taken water before offering him food, Maharaj Ambarish, we see he's neither agitated nor is he sad. He was not fearful. He didn't cry to the Supreme Lord to protect him or provide him with justice, because Durvasa Muni was just being, not following justice. But he was simply thinking about the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord in his heart. And so the Lord reciprocated. And this is because he was engaging all of his senses in the service of the Lord, in knowing that the Lord is the ultimate Ashraya. He can do whatever he wants to do. He can cry, we can be fearful, we can do whatever. But unless and until we surrender to the Lord, saying that you are my ultimate shelter, nothing is going to save us. And that is what saved Maharaj Ambarish as well. And he's a perfect example how he engaged his mind in meditating upon the lotus feet of Krishna. He used his words in describing the glories of the Lord. He used his hands in cleansing the Lord's temple, his ears in hearing the words spoken by Krishna or about Krishna. He engaged his eyes in seeing the deities of Krishna, or Krishna's temples, or the holy places, the holy dhams. And he engaged his sense of touch in touching the bodies of the Lord's devotees and serving them, washing their lotus feet and serving them. He engaged his sense of smell in smelling the fragrance of tulsi and the flowers offered to the Lord. And he engaged his tongue in tasting the Lord's prasad. He engaged his legs in walking to the holy places. He engaged his head in bowing down before the Lord. And so 24 hours a day, we see that Lord Ambarish Maharaj, he engaged all of his senses and in serving the Lord. And because he engaged all of his senses in serving the Lord, he was able to arrive at the ultimate knowledge that the Lord is the ultimate Ashraya. And so even in a testing situation, when he was confronted by Durvasa Muni, it did not affect him at all. Because all he did was he remembered the Lord, knowing having the perfect knowledge that he is the ultimate shelter. And so the Lord reciprocated. And so we hear that, Prabhupada says in the purport that, we see people wanting to acquire knowledge in so many ways. And Prabhupada talks about the scientists wanting to know about the material nature. And why do they want to know about the material nature? Because they just want more and more sense enjoyment. So if it's very hot, so they created, the air conditioner. Because they wanted to feel better, and they wanted to, if they want to watch something, they created, lots of visual things, whether through the internet, whether on the big screen, the movies, so all of that. But it is only for material sense gratification. But also, but they overlook the whole picture and just concentrate on the immediate picture for own self-enjoyment. So what they miss out on is that, when we talk about, because it's just a link of everything, we link the sense, we start with actual creation, we start with how the senses are created, we start with, how the senses are then controlled, and then we come to how the senses should be used. And then finally we come to what are the senses engaged, so how the senses are to be used and for what are the senses to be used. And when we come to this fifth answer, what are the senses to be used, we come to what the verse is telling us today. We come to the answer that we need to know what the great sages have also told us. We need to understand what true knowledge is, not just material knowledge. We can use the material objects around us. As Prabhupada says, even a speaker or a mic, if it's used, it's a material object. But if it is used to speak about Krishna, it immediately becomes a spiritual thing. If we use social platform to talk about Krishna, to engage devotees, they immediately transform from a material platform to a spiritual platform. And so the sages and the acharyas and ultimately the shastras and the Vedas describes the Atma Vidya, or soul knowledge of self, to be the supreme knowledge. And when we talk about knowledge of the self, there is not just knowledge of the individual self, but also knowledge of the Paramatma, who is the supreme Atma. Why? Because again, as Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 13, verse 18, because the Paramatma, he is the source of all of light in all luminous objects. He's the source of the light. We can see because of him. He's beyond the darkness of matter and he's unmanifested. He is knowledge. Krishna says that in 13:18. He is knowledge. He's the object of knowledge and he's the goal of knowledge. So he's knowledge. He's also the object of knowledge and he's the ultimate goal of knowledge. And who is he? Krishna completes the verse by saying he is situated in everyone's heart. He is the Paramatma. So when the sages are telling us that the knowledge is that the senses must be engaged to acquire knowledge of the Atma, of the self, they are talking about not just the Jivatma, but the ultimate, the super soul, the Paramatma, who is situated in everyone's heart. He is the ultimate witness. He is the ultimate sanctioner and the ultimate maintainer of the body. And he is the transcendental enjoyer. He's the transcendental Purusha in our body, in this body. So our enjoyment may be material, but the Paramatma, who's also seated in the body, he's supreme. And we should try to know and hear about this supreme person. That is the only purpose of engaging our senses. That is the only purpose why the whole creation happened. Only purpose why the senses were given to us by the Lord. Why the deities were given the predominating deities were engaged to manage every single sense so that they can guide us to wanting to know the real knowledge. And the scriptures explain that if we try to know about the Paramatma, automatically we will get knowledge about the Jivatma, about one's own self. Because as, just like an individual who's a citizen in a kingdom, they may have information and knowledge about only his house. So if we live in a country, we have knowledge about our own house. So if we start, say, devotion, we may think that, okay, we want to know the soul. We want to know who am I? We want to get the answer, who am I? So we might start meditating. But that is not going to give us full knowledge. Why? Because the individual can only get knowledge about one's own house. But what about the Paramatma? The Paramatma is like the king. The Paramatma is in every single individual entity's heart. So the Paramatma has the overall picture. The Paramatma knows about everything. So to acquire knowledge, one has to understand the Paramatma to be able to understand oneself. Because if one understands only one's own self, their knowledge remains limited. They are not able to see the whole picture. However, if one sees the Paramatma, understands his role, understands that we are all under the shelter of the Lord, then they will understand, who the Paramatma is, and they will always, know even the Paramatma takes shelter from the ultimate Supreme Lord, Krishna. And then they come down to the minutest of the individual soul, the individual Atma, and understand really who I am, that I am a Nitya Das of Krishna. And this can only be understood, as the Acharyas say, and Prabhupada also mentions in one of his verses, one can really understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by devotional service. And Krishna says that ultimately in chapter 18 in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 55, Krishna says, one can understand the Supreme Personality only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of the Supreme Lord by such devotion, only then he can enter into the kingdom of God. So we understand what is the ultimate purpose of life. The ultimate purpose of life is to overcome this repeated birth and death and go back to Godhead. And for all of that, we see how beautifully, Srimad Bhagavatam links everything. We start from creation, and then we talk about how the individual is given the senses, why are the senses given, what knowledge is to be acquired, and what is the ultimate knowledge to be acquired, and what happens if one gets the ultimate knowledge, if one is able to become self-realized, if one is able to understand. As soon as one understands the Supreme Personality of Godhead or gets the ultimate knowledge of God, one can enter into the kingdom of God, Krishna says. And that is what he says, he ultimately declares in the Bhagavad Gita. And that is what we know, the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's words, and how Srimad Bhagavatam is like the manual. It, if you buy a machine, we might be given the instructions, but the explanations of those instructions, how to do the things, that the hows and the whats and the whys, all of that is explained beautifully in Bhagavatam in such an orderly way so that we can link everything. So we are told over here in the verse that, we are still talking about Ashra Tattva. However, the whole purpose of Ashra Tattva is to understand, to get to that knowledge, which the sages also recommend, to get to the ultimate knowledge that everything comes from Krishna and he is in charge of everything. And so the sages decide to hear about the Lord and gain knowledge about the Lord. And similarly, we should be utilizing our power of all the senses to know and understand only Krishna. And that is the only thing that matters. That is the ultimate shelter. That is what Krishna is. We are all dependent on him. We are all his ashritas. And understanding this and acting according to this understanding is the perfection of human life. So I'm sorry, I'm 2 minutes over time. I'm not sure if there is time to actually say the pastime, which I also thought I'd be able to cover. But yes, please accept my humble obeisances, and please do correct me if I'm wrong anywhere.
Hare Krishna, Priya Govind Prabhu, can I ask a question, please? Okay.
Yes, Mataji.
Thank you. Mataji, is it possible for you to clarify again the Adi Devik, Adi Bhautik and Adhyatmik component? So the presiding deities would be the Adi Devik.
Yes.
A little confusion in the Adhyatmik and Adi Bhautik.
Okay, so I'd say, for example, we are seeing something, yes? So the eyeballs, the gross body, things we can touch, the material body, that is Adi Bhautik. And the perception to see, the senses to see. So you can have just an eyeball, but that eyeball in itself needs to have some power to be able to do the action of seeing. And that perception, that sense to be able to see, that sense perception is the Adhyatmik. So what usually happens is the souls, they try to think of themselves as the senses, and the souls usually attaches themselves to the senses and ends up being being called the Adhyatmik. So we usually say the perception of the senses is Adhyatmik, the actual body is Adipautic, and the Adidevik is the controlling senses. Now, it can be also explained in a different way. It can be said, suppose we also talk about the 3 miseries of life. Now, we say the 3 miseries of life, some miseries that are inflicted on us by our own selves. So we just said the sense perception, where the soul attaches oneself to the sense perception, that is Adhyatmik. So similarly, we say that miseries which are inflicted on us by our own selves, we have mental health problems, things we, think of, and then we get ill. So any miseries which are inflicted on us by our own selves, that is Adhyatmik misery. Any misery that is inflicted on us by somebody, by an external body, that is Adipautic. So similarly, when we talk about the senses, we see that what is the external body? The external body through which we are sensing something is the actual gross body. So through our ears or through our eyes, those are the actual things, the external bodies through which we are perceiving something, through which are used as a vehicle to see something, to hear something, to smell something. So similarly, when we talk about the miseries as well, and when an external body gives us misery, so, it could be an external person or, anything external that gives us misery, that is adipautic misery. And when we talk about the adipautic purusha, that is anything that's the gross body, because they are just the material, they are made up of the gross materials. I mean, everything, even our senses, even our subtle body is made up of the 5 gross materials, but they are like the eyeballs, things which we can touch or things which we can see, the external body. And then it is the aditaivik. So when we talk about the senses, we say every single sense, every single part of our body, they have a predominating deity, and that is aditaivik purusha. And when we talk about aditaivik misery, then we say any kind of misery that is inflicted upon us by a supernatural power or the demigods. That is aditaivik misery. So that is something where we do not have any control. So just like we say when we talk about the aditaivik purusha, we may desire, but the aditaivik person, the Surya Dev, sun god, has to be happy with us to give us that power to be able to use our sense of power and to use our eyeballs to be able to see. So Surya Dev has to be happy with us. Similarly, if it is aditaivik misery, if a demigod is not happy with us, that is when it's not in our power at all. They can inflict, famines or droughts or flood or tsunamis, or earthquake. That is when it comes from the aditaivik power, whether it's aditaivik misery or when we talk about aditaivik purusha, the purushas, the controlling deities of each senses. Does it make sense, Mataji? So adhyatmic is very, very self-related, self-perception, own sense perception, self-related. Adipautic is external, other things, external things. And adipautic purusha, what we can see, what we can touch. And aditaivik are the controlling deities.
Thank you. Yes, Mataji, it makes perfect sense. Okay. Over to you, Priya Govind Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Anyone else with the question, comment? I think there is a chat message on the chat.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo
Grace Panchali Mataji ki jai, Rantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Good, Hari Premanande, Hari.
Hari Bol, all glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.